welcome to another analysis video, and today we're in Witcher 3 and we're going to be looking at specifically Foliage with a little bit of talk about like environmental stuff. Foliage. I'm picking Witcher 3 for this because it's one of the best examples of foliage that I can think about. Okay, let's go for our checklist at the beginning. The age of this game. Well, this is about 9-10 years old. So it's getting on a little bit. The platform, I'm on PC, but this was also released on console. Players, it's a single player game. There are no multiplayer aspects of this game. And the play style, it's a fairly slow paced game. You know, it's a long game. And the graphics, back then I'd say it was realistic. I'd say it was realistic for back in 9-10 years ago. Now, why is this all important once again? Because this is all giving us, when we're analysing these games, it gives us a jumping off point to actually kind of, okay, how are they optimizing this game? It's 9 to 10 years old, so it's getting on a little bit. We're going to start seeing some things. Some things are going to be a bit more obvious. The platform is PC, so we're actually going to be looking at some pretty nice graphics anyway. Because again, PC is more scalable. Consoles, because it's all dependent on the hardware of the system, all the graphics will be throttled. You don't really have graphic options on a PC, on a console. On a PC, you have load of graphic issues. Loads of graphic options. Single player, it's slow paced. I'm not having to communicate anything down a cable into a server and then it goes off to other people. There's no multiplayer in it whatsoever. And playstyle, it's slow, so if it's a really fast paced game, you can kind of be a bit cheeky with how much information you put in stuff. It's a slow paced game. People are going to spend a lot of time looking at stuff, so you know, we want to make sure that we're not cheaping out on any of the textures. We want to make sure that it's beautiful, and it is a beautiful game. And graphics is realistic, let's call it. So, we're in Witcher 3, like I said, and welcome to Skellige on this rainy day. It's 6 AM in the morning, or 6:30 in the morning, and we're in a lovely valley, and I do believe there's a bear over there. So, let's have a look and talk about some stuff. So, foliage in games, for me, it's one of the most funnest... Oh, rain stopped. It's one of the most funnest bits to create. Easiest and also the most funnest bits to create. But it's easiest to start creating, but then it does have a bit of a steep learning curve when it comes to actually getting it looking amazing in the engine. But creating it is actually really, really simple. Even in a game engine, no, it's really simple. What are we looking at? When we look at foliage in the real world or in games, what are we looking at? Well, we have that primary, secondary, and tertiary read for stuff. You know, primary, I'm looking over here, I'm looking over here, I'm looking over here, and then I turn around and look at that. What am I seeing? I'm seeing colour, first of all. I'm seeing yellow, I'm seeing purple, I'm seeing green, and I'm seeing a little bit of white. That's the first thing I see. You know, we just don't want our landscapes to be green, and we can take this to the painting as well. This isn't just 3D, this is painting, composition in general. You know, I'm seeing these colours. I'm seeing these nice complementary colours. These colours make sense to the environment as well. So Skellige, where I am right now, is the game's allegory for like Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and kind of parts of Finland and stuff. It's craggy. You know, it's a lot of heather and lavender and that kind of stuff. We're not going to start seeing the vibrancy of the Mediterranean or anything like that. We're going to see windswept landscapes. So, you know, that's why we're seeing this purple and these yellows. The secondary read, then we start seeing the clumps of these colours. So we start seeing that, you know, maybe the yellow is because that plant grows in a certain way, and all the yellows are kind of clustering together in a certain way. They're a bit more spikier. The purple is more in like big patches because maybe the purple plant is like a bit of a colonial plant, so it tends to gather together in clusters. And then maybe the white creamy plant, maybe that's kind of in more strips and stripes because it's, you know, it gets blown and it kind of lays its seeds in the direction of the wind blowing kind of thing. So you get these different shapes appearing. So not everything is just in the same old cluster of, you know, everything's in like a big round shape. You know, you've got one type of plant grows like this, another type of plant grows like this, another type of plant grows like this. And then your tertiary read, your third read is, if we can see any, the detail. So even from this distance, I can see that the purple plants are a little bit taller, the yellow plants are a little bit tuftier, puffier, and the white plants are a bit more like dappley snow dapple kind of thing. And that's 2 seconds of reading, but it's very important because that's an engagement factor for the player. I'm looking around, especially if I'm working on a game and I'm doing something where I'm coming out of a dark hovel. I want to give the player a sense of breath of fresh air. That you're outside of the dark cave. You're into the outside light, or you come from over the top of these mountains and then you hit the valley. You want to be able to be like, oh yeah, show them show them primary, secondary, and tertiary reads. And there are other plants as well. It's not just those three plants. There's other stuff like not geraniums, but these kind of like hyacinth-looking dudes here. Let's go, he says. There's these red dudes over here. Now these are actually collectible plants. We'll talk about them in a second. But let's actually go over and let's actually have a look at some of these plants. Because one thing I love about Witcher 3 as well is the fact that we've got a photo mode. So I'm going to find myself a nice little position. And what's really nice to think about as well is the heights of stuff. Because what's happening is, if I'm looking at a distance, I'm looking up that hill there to that structure, I'm seeing less and less green, and I'm seeing more and more colour, because these plants are taller. So I'm seeing the yellows, I'm seeing the purples, and I'm seeing more of these white flowers kind of like popping out a little bit. But then when I'm getting closer, and I'm looking down at them, I'm getting a mixture of stuff because I'm getting height variations. My grasses are shorter, so then they're coming out more, and then I've got this like reedy straw kind of grass, this kind of brown stuff, which is again a little bit higher. So again, verticality. Not everything is not just going to be the same size. You're going to get verticality. Even within these plants, you're going to get different sizes. Some plants are going to be taller than others, even inside the same family. There's the bear over there. So let's go to photo mode. Let's have a look around. So I've done enough talking. Let's actually have a look. So like I said, primary, secondary, and tertiary read. Color, shape, detail. That's it. That's the order it goes. Color, shape, detail. So let's actually have a closer look at some of these. So when I actually had a look at these plants for the first time, I was so surprised at actually how much detail is in them. Because I went through my list before, age, platform, players, playstyle, graphics, and I'm thinking, well, this is a 10-year-old game. There's a lot of stuff going on screen. There's a lot of foliage everywhere. Oh, it's going to be super, super optimized. But I was so kind of surprised to look at, actually, this is a surprisingly detailed foliage. But it's still an absolute piece of shit. Foliage is awesome. So these beautiful yellow flowers, when we get closer to them, that's what it is. That's the actual texture of the flower, which, trust me, is actually quite high res for what a flower should be. But you can actually see what's actually happening. Foliage is all controlled by an opacity map, and that's just a black and white map on a flat plane. Black you cannot see, white you can see. That's literally what it is. So I would have a black background on my canvas, and I would paint in some. If I'm just doing grass, I just paint in white blades of grass, and that's it. That's my grass is done. For the shape, and then I'd control the colour through colour, obviously. It's a little bit more complex than that, but not that much more. But you can see there, that's all it is. That's what's making the flowers that shape. And if you look, the edges of them are kind of nasty as well. But again, they're a lot more high-res than what I would expect them to be, but they're not like super soft, smooth edges. They're actually quite janky, and that's because they're doing something called a mask. It's an opacity map, but they're using something called a mask, which basically gives you a really hard edge. So there's no blend in between grey or anything like that. It's just like either white or it's either black. And up close, it looks kind of nasty, but again, you step back. Foliage is all about the greater good. It's all about the group rather than the single. Unless you're doing something where you're actually making a game about plants and you're always staring at plants, or you're making a game where you're a bug or something. Plants are kind of need to be on the lower end of detail because you need to have them scattered everywhere, and they can't grab the player's attention if they're literally just like general foliage. Some stuff does need to grab the player's attention because that over there is a collectible plant. I collect reagents from that for potions, so I need to be aware of that. And you'll be able to see those plants actually. I'll go up and you'll be able to really notice the collectible plants. So there's one right there. There's that red one there. There's a purple one right there. There's another white one there. There's a yellow one there. Looks like a daffodil, this one. Let's go closer. Again, look at how basic that is. Now again, these are slightly more detailed purely because of like their importance in the game. But also these... Oh, he's done that bug. Okay, so we're back in... Sorry about that. That was a fun little bug where all the water rises up and shifts to the right, and it makes it look like everything's underwater, and if I try and load anything, it crashes. So, don't do that again. Wait. Yes, we're looking at plants. Okay, so... yes, let's have a look at this. So yeah, like when we actually have a look at the plants themselves, that's what it actually is. So all these are just flat planes. In fact, these are 4 flat planes just intersecting with each other to make a little cross. So when you look at it individually, it looks terrible. You know, if I go side on, you can see there that it literally is just a flat plane. But then again, when you step back and even look at a basic cluster, like a little cluster of them here, for instance, you don't necessarily see that flat plane. You just see a really nice little cluster of plants. And then when you look at the whole like this, it looks gorgeous. The same thing is going to happen with this lavender kind of plant here. In fact, I think it's the same count. Is it? It's less. It's 3. There are 3 planes that make up this particular lavender cluster here. And you'll make 1 or 2 of these clusters, and again, you'll just kind of distribute them around using like painting techniques. Okay, so yeah, that was in. So this video has already crashed once before. This seems to be a cursed video. So the way we actually create these massive landscapes as well, I'm talking in the Unreal Engine way. I don't know how they did it in this engine, because I don't think this is Unreal Engine. But what we have is literally called a foliage brush, and it's where you can paint foliage into a scene. But the great thing about it is you can actually tell it what foliage to paint, and individually how much to paint of that particular foliage and in what way to scatter it around. So I could come in here and do a pass of all the grasses and tell it vary my sizes from this to this, vary my scattering from this to this, and I put in my green grass, and then I'll also plug in my straw grass, and I say, okay, distribute my straw grass less and distribute them further apart from each other. So where my main green grass is going to be clustered together a lot, my brown grass is going to be clustered together less, and you're going to see less of them. And then I'll load up my brush with the yellow, the red, and maybe the white plants, and I'll do like little clusters where they're all kind of clustered together. I'll paint them in together possibly, or I'll go in there with just the yellow plants, just the orange plants, the purple plants, just the white plants. And you can literally go in there and paint the foliage in, which is amazing. You know, we're not placing all these by hand. Hell no. The same thing for the trees as well. You'll make a bunch of trees in a very quick way. We're not actually going to look at how to make trees in this video. I did do in the last one, but like I said, I lost that video and it was a long one. So these trees are actually really simple. So let's actually go over to the trees and actually have a look. Yeah, indeed. Nope. There we go. So these trees in general are a lot simpler than what you think they are. Because what are trees? Trees are a main trunk, and then you got limbs coming off them. That's what trees generally are. So let's have a look at how we actually make them in games. We have our main trunk, obviously. It's fairly simple. It just got a little bit of curve to it. And if we look at these branches here, you can see there that that branch is not actually connected to the tree. It's just kind of pushed in. You've modeled this branch separately, and you might model like 2 or 3 of them, or as many as you want really, and then you just basically distribute them around the tree. Now, there might only be one of this type of tree because I've already seen this before. Where was it? I had it then. There it is. One of the branches isn't aligned. It kind of comes off. Obviously, you're not going to see that if you're not going to look for it. It's not something that jumps out to the player, but right there you can see that the branch isn't actually connected to the tree. Dead simple. And that branch itself might only be 6 faces going round, so it's a 6-sided cylinder, maybe at most. maybe in a four-sided cylinder, that you just kind of make look kind of like a branch. The tree trunk itself, I think this tree trunk is either between 6 to 8 faces going round. But it looks dead round, doesn't it? That's because we're seeing a cylinder. We're not seeing individual faces, especially when textures are applied. And then for the branches, the sub-branches, so you've got the main branch which comes off, the one that's smashed in like that. And then for the other branches, they're all just flat planes. Maybe not flat planes completely. They'll have a few divisions in them to give them, to make them hang and droop as limbs tend to do. But it's not going to have any depth to it. It's not actually going to be like a 3D shape. And then you just have a texture of these branches. Maybe you've got like a whole few of them, and you just basically have all these textures, all these branches kind of hanging out, looking like they're part of the tree. And when you step back, look at how nice that tree looks. We don't see the low res. We don't see the really rubbish. We don't even see that limb that's not actually connected. But then when we get closer, again, look at how crap that is. We could even see little clumps that are just hanging in space because of how this masking thing works. We can see them just hanging off in space. And even so, look at that texture of this branch coming down the middle of the screen. It's being torn. We don't see that. We step back. That's not to say that we could be super lazy and we just half-ass everything. We don't. We still have to do the best we can. It's just that because of the process of making games, some stuff ends up looking a little bit naff when you get close up to it. So let's have a look at a version of the tree with stuff on it. So this is I think they're called conifer trees essentially. And again, same thing. We've got a trunk in the middle, but this time what we've got is all single planes of these little conifer ferns or fronds. But that's a great example. Look at this. Look at this guy right here. Look how straight that is. That just boom. There's no division. That's like a single plane that's got a division going down the middle of it. Look at that. So simple. And that's just got a texture applied to it with all this like conifer frond information. Now some of these do have more divisions in them. I think when you get closer to the bottom here it might, but some of these do have a bit more division in them, like there. This one kind of comes up and up and up and up like that, so it swings upwards. But some at the top are really basic because the player's never going to see that high. The frond isn't that big. But now down at the bottom, where obviously gravity is going to be a lot stronger, then your fronds are going to be bigger. They're going to bend a little bit more. But again, all that is just essentially a single flat plane with a few divisions to give it a bit of kind of life, and that's it. And then you got a trunk on the inside. That's all trees are. They just take a bit of time to make. And then you can do some mixy-matchy stuff like this geezer here, where it's a bit dead at the bottom, but then it's a bit more alive at the top. Really simple. But the same thing applies. Even this felled tree here, it's still all the same information. There's nothing different. But how we do grass here, so let's have a look at this grass. Again, it's a lot more it's a lot higher resolution than I originally expected it to be. But look at that, it's so simple. And this is all again just very strategically placed clumps. It looks 3D. It's really not. We'll be doing foliage at some point, so we'll be able to really see how this stuff is made. And you'll be able to see this kind of stuff in games all the time, where we can be as precious as we can, but you're always going to have stuff that kind of pokes through. This rock has got some of this plant poking through. But really, this is how simple and complex foliage needs to be at the beginning. So the hard part about foliage is this kind of stuff. It's having that next level of believability. If you're doing something that's realistic and you're wanting to have light come through the back from behind a leaf or something and shine through a leaf, especially if you're doing like big tropical leaves, and when you look through one of those towards the sun, you'll see that it's not actually green. It's more like a yellow color because all the separate layers of this leaf are actually more of a yellow, and they come together to make a green. And it's all about how light processes through a surface. That's a little bit more difficult. Not incredibly difficult, a little bit more difficult. And then the hard part, really the thing that the hardest part about foliage is just making it look natural. But that's not particularly that hard. It's a time-consuming process to actually, you can imagine how it's definitely not going to be one person doing this. There's going to be a few people making this environment here, but imagine if one person had to make this whole environment from scratch, minus any of the landscape like buildings and like just the foliage and the trees and stuff. If one person had to build this, it'd take them some time, even if they're making it from scratch. They'd be able to knock out the plants and the trees as assets very fast. But then it's a time to actually place them in and make them this, and then, you know, hoping that when you apply the wind to it, it makes sense. But wind as well is something that is actually it's a bit of a con. It's not actually wind that's happening. Um, at least in the Unreal Engine, there's literally a wind thing that we put onto a material. So it's not actually physically wind. It's something we put on a material to make the material move that then influences the geometry. It's kind of funky. But what's fun to do as well is look at in like environments like this and almost focusing on one area or focusing on one plant, and you might even be able to see that there's a rhythm, or it's not as natural as it looks. You know, again, when you look at the whole environment as a whole, it looks windswept and organic and everything's moving and independently. But then you focus in on something, you'll start seeing like repetitions. You start seeing the same thing happening. You almost might even be able to see where it loops and the whole kind of cycle starts again. Because yeah, wind. Imagine trying to calculate the individual vertex movements for every piece of geometry in this scene. You're not going to be able to do that. So what we do is we just apply this quote-unquote wind to an object and then just vary up the speed. Actually, nothing's being simulated. It's all kind of predetermined, you know, optimization. But that's Foliage, and we'll look at Foliage more in other games. We'll look at it a bit closer when we're actually going to do it. But Foliage is really simple. But I really want you to look at Foliage in games. Obviously, some games are going to be not useful to look at. Like any 2D game, it's not very useful to look at. Anything that's really low res, like Lethal Company, it's not going to be really good to look at if there's even foliage in that. But it's games like, you know, Witcher 3, Control, Destiny 2. I'm just going off stuff that's on my playlist. Power Wash Simulator, Baldur's Gate, Elden Ring. That's the games that I kind of play. So whatever games you'll play, like Overwatch, Fortnite, you know, what foliage is in there? PUBG, if anyone still plays it, because I know you all play them kind of crappy games. So, you know, have a look at those and see what's going on. Yeah. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about landscapes and environments when I was here. So landscape and environment art it's a massive job, but you've got to think really deep into stuff. You've got to really think about stuff when you're making them, and it's the same kind of level of thinking we do inside Foliage. It's just a little bit tougher. But generally, these two things will be done by the same person. You know, if you do Foliage, you're generally going to be in an environment team, and if you're in an environment team, you're generally going to do landscapes. Especially if you're in a smaller team, or if you just want to get better, do them all. But it's this kind of level of detail. Like we're talking about that primary, secondary, and tertiary read before. So the same thing happens here. So yes, we've got that primary, secondary, and tertiary read here. We've done that because we've studied the environments, we've looked at the kind of references, we understand how these plants look and how they act in the environment, and maybe if we're doing concept painting, we've used that. When it comes to environments, and I'm mainly going to be talking about what we're looking at here. If I go higher, as high as I can go, I think that's about it. Yeah, okay. So if you're making an environment like this, you've got to think about the way that the player is going to be interacting, the things that the player is going to be looking at. Is the player going to be traveling from one area to another area? Are they going to be traveling from somewhere? So are they going to be traveling down with the river, or are they going to be traveling across the river? Are they coming from a dark environment, like a cave system that they've been in for a few hours, and then they come out and they're being greeted with this open, beautiful landscape? What's the history behind the object, behind the scene? You know, even as concept artists, think about that kind of stuff. What is the emotion you want to put across? Is this someone who is meant to be seeing this for the first time? Is that the previous statement? You're not just painting a landscape. What's the history behind it? When you're building these environments as well, there's loads of different things that happen or can happen. So if I'm just doing a flat desert environment, I can't just have a flat desert environment with nothing in it. I've got to have a place to go. I've got to have something very obvious for the player to go towards. In an environment like this, I can have multiple different things because it's kind of this weird. How can I explain this? If you've just got a really flat environment, if there's nothing there to pull the attention, it gets boring. But in an environment like this, you don't necessarily need to point out stuff really obviously, because there's already a lot of stuff to look at. It's not going to get boring. So the fact that we're in a kind of like a bit of a valley, we're being flanked by these two big mountain ranges either side of us. That's nice. That's really cozy. And then we've got a stream that runs through, which is nice. And then it's not super obvious at first, but then you've got a castle back there. You've got a kind of a ruin over there. In the distance, you'll see a lighthouse. There's also a bit of tuft of smoke. I think there's a village over there. You've got other mountain ranges in the back there and over there and over there. So we're not pulling the player towards anything. They're naturally getting pulled through the environment. On a technical standpoint, these whole environment might be made a few different ways. This might be one solid piece of geometry. Very dense for what it is, but it might be one solid piece of geometry that is using a few different techniques to make this. You wouldn't handcraft that mountain there, or that mountain there, or you might not even handcraft a majority of the landscape here. We're going to ignore the flowers. We're going to imagine that there's no flowers or trees there anymore. We're just looking at the ground. You might end up. You create the mountains using height maps and using like these really cool maps that give you this realistic kind of view. And then there's shaders that allow you to place snow correctly. It's all about the angles of the surface, and if it's above a certain angle, you don't put snow on it. If it's in a certain angle, you put snow on it, because snow wouldn't go on a vertical surface. But those also might be, in some games, you might actually find that those are actually separate geometry. The mountain range is its own piece of geometry that's smashed into the ground and then hidden by different bits of geometry. This one looks like it's all one solid piece. And how... I'll try and explain, because I can't draw it on screen, but I'll try and explain this. In game engines, we tend to do stuff using cells. So if you draw... Let's see if I can do it in front of me and I'll talk you through it. If you draw a big square on a piece of paper, and then you break it up into thirds, so you'll think you're doing a rule of thirds grid. That center square, so you've got a grid of 9 essentially. That center square there is where the player is, and that's a big grid. That's where we are at the minute, and that's a really dense grid as well. It's a really, really dense grid. And then on the outer 8 edges, so on the left hand side I'm going to draw a line going down, on the right hand side I'm going to draw a line going down, top I'm going to draw a line going down, line going there. Now those outside squares are lower res squares. They're far enough away from the player where you're not going to see that actually it's lower resolution, that it's a kind of a bit shittier, because it's something called level of detail. So for instance, off in the mountain, that back mountain there, that's not going to be as high resolution as this mountain to the left of me, or even this bit of land right in front of me. It's going to be lower resolution because it's so far away. And as I get closer to it, it's going to up-res. It's what we call level of detail, or lodding in the game. And then on that grid, I'm going to draw another line on the outside. I'm actually going to take a picture of this, and then I'll try and remember to put it in the video, because I have to edit this video together anyway. And it might look funny, or I'll redraw it again a bit easier. It might look a bit funny, a bit hard to understand, but basically the further away from the player we are, the less resolution is applied to the geometry. And you actually, all these trees over there as well, I wish I could get close to them, because those trees off in the distance will probably be flat geometry. In fact, ooh, right in the middle of the screen there, do you see how a tree's kind of shifting? Like that. There's a tree that's kind of shifting in the background. Right in the middle of the screen. That is because I'm slightly getting towards a tree Where here, that's really nice actually. That's so far away that it's a very, very, very basic version of that tree. It might even be a flat plane with just like a basic tree texture on it. But I'm just getting close enough there where it has to load in a new tree, which is slightly higher res. And then as I get closer, it'll load in another tree and another tree. In fact, these trees over there, they're relatively close, but they will still be lower res trees. These trees here are probably going to be the actual trees. Like them trees over there will be like LOD level 1 or something. This is LOD 0, that's probably LOD 1. These are LOD 0 because they're right in front of me. These trees are beautiful. So yeah, I'll draw that grid out and I'll try and explain it. But yeah, basically if you draw a grid of 9, the center grid is where you are, and the outside 8 grids are lower res. And then if you split those 8 squares into another 4 squares each, then the very outside smaller squares are even lower res because they're further away. And there's going to be points where actually we'll cull out, we call it culling, cull out the environment so that we're not actually loading it at all. So possibly behind that mountain, we've literally just deleted the environment, so we're not actually having to load that environment at all. Same for over there, we're not actually having to load the environment behind that mountain range. So if we don't see it, we unload it. It's called flustrum culling. And it's mainly in smaller environments that you do that. But yeah, so I finally got to the end of the cursed video. Foliage, it's really, really cool. This is just an analysis of one game. We're going to look at other games, going through that checklist again. But, you know, yeah, spend a bit of time on Foliage. I like it. Foliage is one of my favourite parts about environments. And in a game like this, which is one of my favourite games, it's really beautiful. And obviously, depending on where you are, this is Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Finlandy kind of environments. But then you've got the more Spanish environments, you've got the Polish environments, you've got the French environments, the German environments. It's very, very cool. So we're probably going to do another video in Witcher for another look at environments. We've already looked at environments in Destiny 2, and we're going to look at other environments in other games. But we're going to look at it inside here again, just to again have another see of how things are made. See if we can see behind the scenes of a game which is kind of the same age as Destiny 2 as well. Cool, so I'll see you in the next one.